Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our forum, Is the News Release Dead? And we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. This is a professional development forum of the North American Snowsports journalists. We're happy to have all of you with us here tonight. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get underway. We ask everyone to please mute yourself. You can keep your little picture on the screen if you want, but please do mute your audio so we have a good atmosphere for our four panelists who are joining us here this evening, plus a special guest. We expect to go about an hour with the forum. We will have a recording available for you later if you want to go back and look at something, post it to your social media or whatever. To get things kicked off tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce a longtime friend and longtime journalist and a professional communicator. Please welcome the president of NASJA, Jeff Blumenfeld. Jeff?
Well, welcome everyone. This is NASJA's 60th anniversary will be coming up next year. And that's 60 years of encouraging professionalism in snow sports journalism. We're made up of 200 press and corporate members, and our press members include writers and photographers and other communicators who report on ski, snowboard, and Nordic. And our corporate members include media contacts at ski resorts, convention and visitors bureaus, and manufacturers. And this professional development session is one in a series. Last year, we've examined COVID restrictions. We looked at an Olympic preview. We previewed what's next for the coming season at resorts and took a look at new gear for 22-23. And now, whether the press release is dead or not. I remember starting in PR in the 1970s in New York. Yes, that was when dinosaurs were roaming the earth. And how did we reach the media back then? Well, press releases were stuffed into envelopes. We put stamps on them. We threw them out the door into the postal service. Then we made phone calls afterwards to follow up. We used messengers to deliver press kits. We delivered crazy packages to their office. Of course, that was before anthrax. We had big sloppy lunches. We had a huge Christmas budget for schmoozing. And oh boy, along came quip machines, if you remember those. It took 4 minutes for a fax. We thought that was miraculous when faxes came across. And then email unleashed a flood of media pitches. In fact, now that I switched to journalism, I recently got a pitch from an Alaskan airline that they were switching their cookie supplier. How could I not write about that, of course? The world of media relations is vastly different now, as we'll discuss in the next hour. And Tom is our moderator. He excelled as the voice of the U.S. ski team through 3 decades and 100 Olympic medals. We're proud to have him serve as a NASJA vice president, and I'm privileged to call him a friend. Tom, take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeff, and really happy to be here tonight. You know, as you went through those stories, and I hate to go back in time, but I just have to share my snow reporting story. I was listening to podcast on Stuart's channel, Storm Skiing Podcast the other day with Joel Gratz from Open Snow. And I was thinking back when I worked for the Telemark ski area in northern Wisconsin back in the late 70s. We used to do the snow reports on Wednesday, and we would send them out on a little postcard by mail to our mailing list, hope they would get delivered by Thursday or Friday, and that would tell the skiers how many inches of new snow we had up at Telemark. And I'm sure, like everybody back in those days, 2 inches equated to 6 inches, and 6 inches was 18. So it is what it is, but those were fun times. But a lot has changed over time, and all of us have had to really move along with that. Tonight, we're going to explore. Yeah, we're going to talk about, is the news release still a functional item? And I think everybody's going to agree, yes, it is. But there are so many new ways that we communicate. And we're going to look at it from the perspective of an editor and a journalist, and we'll look at it from the perspective of a professional communicator. We have a panel of 4 individuals, and we're going to have a special guest coming up as well. And then we will do Q&A at the finish, and we'll make sure to allow about 10 minutes for that. I want to introduce each member of our panel to kick it off and have them tell a little bit about themselves. And the first one is someone who came onto the scene just a couple of years ago with a podcast. And I remember listening to this first podcast with Steven Kirchner of Boyne Resorts. And I'm thinking, who is this journalist who's extracting all of this vital business information out of Steven Kirchner? But he did, and he's gone on to record over 100 episodes of the Storm Skiing Podcast and really has helped to revolutionize journalism in our sport. Stuart Winchester, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks so much, Tom. I really appreciate the opportunity to join this panel tonight. So yeah, the Storm Skiing Journal and podcast, the podcast, as I always say in every podcast, is just a small part of the storm. The heart of the whole operation is this email newsletter, and the podcast is part of that newsletter. And my background is for the last 15 years, I've worked for the National Basketball Association and Paramount, which used to be Viacom here in New York City. And there's a robust core of media that covers every single thing that these companies do in a critical way, in an analytical way. And I really thought skiing deserved that. And I think it used to have a little more of that back in the magazine days. But what happened over time was a lot of ski coverage that I would seek out was either stoke, well, guys jumping off cliffs, which is fun. It's not super relatable, or it was press release reprints. And the gap, the vacuum was filled by social media. And I said, okay, well, maybe there's an opportunity here. As someone who is a journalist, I could take and make a podcast and feature a different ski area manager on each episode and actually get that information from them. Why did you build a lift here? Why don't you make snow on this trail? Why didn't this expansion work out? And the newsletter, what I really wanted to accomplish with that was talk about skiing in a critical way. Like, A Basin leaves the Epic Pass and joins the Icon Pass. Well, so what? What does that mean? What does it mean for the Icon Pass? What does it mean for Colorado? What does it mean for Epic? What does it mean for Summit County? And I felt like a lot of ski media was, even if it wasn't, it felt very pay to play. It felt very deferential to the ski resorts. And I think that they can take a little heat. And I think that's what the skiers want. They want a critical analysis of the industry and what's happening, not fluff and stoke all the time. So, something a little more honest and nuanced, and that's sort of been the mission and the project. And, so far so good, I guess.
Good. Well,
Thanks.
We'll talk a lot more tonight, Stuart. Thank you so much for
Sure.
Thank you so much for joining us. Next up, I want to introduce Katie Brinton, who's the senior editor for Ski Area Management Magazine. Katie took a passion for skiing and is a ski instructor and was a journalist, somehow found her way to the editor's chair. And Katie, give us a little bit more background on yourself, if you could.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a mystery there. No, I have a background in English literature. I started writing for Ski Area Management Magazine and eventually became an editor with the publication. So I'm the senior editor of SAM, and we really speak to the business side of the industry rather than the consumer, right? For those of you who maybe aren't familiar with us. And while I'm relatively new to SAM, I started writing for us, probably 5 years ago, and started editing the publication 2 years ago. The magazine itself has been around for the last 60 years. We just celebrated 60 years of continuous publication, which is really exciting. So I think my team has a really interesting perspective on how the industry and the media landscape around the industry has evolved in the last few decades.
Well, thank you very much, Katie. Glad to have you here. And we have two journalists, Stuart and Katie, and we have two professional communicators. And the first one I want to introduce is a longtime friend of mine, Lindsay Hogan. Lindsay is now the senior director of communications at Vail Resorts. I actually met Lindsay 20 years ago at the 2002 Olympics when she was interning and I was working the games. And it's a friendship that we've kept up over the years. Along the way, she worked in tourism in Breckenridge, also worked for U.S. figure skating, and did about a 13 or 14-year stint with the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And we're happy to have her here to share her broad expertise and perspective from Vail Resorts. Lindsay?
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and to speak with all of you today. As Tom mentioned, I spent the majority of my career in the Olympic movement. I was the Senior Director of Marketing Communications for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee for quite a while. Had the opportunity to work on proactive positive publicity, a lot of work with NBC Sports, athlete campaigns, media events, and prior to that time worked more closely with U.S. figure skating and then also the U.S. ski team. Tom is one of my most valued mentors throughout my career, and I've been so grateful to learn from him. But my recent stint at Vail Resorts is kind of feels like coming full circle, because my first job was doing PR for the Breckenridge Tourism Office a lifetime ago, and really just fell in love with the mountain community culture and the ski resorts that allow so many across the world to experience one of my passions, which is living healthy, active outdoor lifestyles. So I've been with Vail Resorts for 2 years now. I am the Senior Director of Communications for the Mountain Division, which means I have the privilege and the honor of working with our communications professionals who are in the field across all of our 37 North American resorts. And I work to do everything I can to help support them, set them up for success, provide leadership opportunities, and ensure there's connection and strategy that is woven throughout our 37 North American resorts. And our teams manage both traditional media relations and PR, media hosting, influencers, as well as our social media channels, which will be great to talk about more today.
Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to come back to you in just a minute to dive into our topic. Our final panelist is another longtime friend of mine, and she is a legend in the outdoor industry. Her company, CGPR, is actually celebrating, I think, its 30th anniversary. And Chris, you'll have to tell us more about that. It just seems like yesterday. But she has worked across the entire outside industry, not just skiing, but both summer and winter. She's been a fixture at the Outdoor Retailer Show, and we'll see her back here in Salt Lake City this January. So Chris Goddard, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and thanks everybody for taking time out of their busy schedules during the holiday season. Just a note here, CGPR is celebrating 30 years, and my very first client was Killington working with Jeff. We were in the trenches working to launch the new chair. What I can't even remember what it was, but it was Jeff was my thank you, my first client. I have a very mixed background. CGPR is really a consumer active lifestyle firm. We work for clients that straddle fashion, outdoor, and yes, we also handle PR for the Outdoor Retailer Show, but SIA was our client for 7 years. The SIA show was our client. But I also had the privilege of starting my career in Washington, D.C., working for the mayor of New York as a lobbyist, and was in the White House in the Office of Congressional Liaison. And I would say really found my true calling when I started my own business about 30 years ago, again, with Jeff Killington being my first client, and then Merrill Footwear being my second client. And before I know it, here we are 30 years later, and really look forward to hearing what everybody has to say, and privileged to be on a panel with such accomplished professionals. And Tom, look forward to seeing you in Salt Lake in the not too distant future.
Well, I wish you were bringing your skis, but I'll take care of the skiing for you. Okay, Chris, I'm going to stay with you as we kick things off. Okay, panelists, this is where you get to answer the question: is the news release dead? And really taking it a little bit beyond, but talk about the news release, the function that it's held, and where is it today? Chris, you can kick it off.
Sure. I think definitely the news release is not dead, for sure. It's definitely a very important tool, especially if you are a publicly traded company, or even if you are a smaller company. But it's not so much just the news release itself. It's what you do with a journalist prior to that news release. One of the things I really believe is nurturing relationships with journalists before you need them. I'm sort of an avid reader of 5 or 6 online newspapers every day. And you would be surprised on the weekend if I just send a note to somebody that says, great story, really loved it, or really was interested in that point. It always comes back to help me when I send out that release. But for me, Tom, and everybody, I think the news release is definitely a tool, but you have to be more creative, and you have to be much more succinct in what you're saying, especially with the completely chaotic news landscape that we're in.
Just to piggyback on that outreach, that personalized outreach to journalists, that can make all the difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that what really surprises me is that how many responses you will get even on a weekend. For instance, I'll give an example. Last Sunday, the New York Times had a full page on, it was an infographic on microplastics. And I posted that on my LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn a lot. And within 30 seconds, Mark Lacey, who's the executive editor of the New York Times, had already liked it and reposted it. So you would be surprised. Journalists just want to be thanked for what they do, because right now, since COVID, the landscape has decreased, shrunken by 50%. And I think I saw a statistic from Propel that came out yesterday that for every journalist, there are 6 PR people. So welcome to our world.
I saw that. That was really interesting. Lindsay, Hogan, I want to go to you next and talk about the same topic. You know, where's the news release stand in the Vail Resort spectrum?
Yeah, I would agree that the news release isn't dead, but I do think it's more impactful around obvious news. So for instance, earnings reports, if we have major announcements about pass sales, things that we know media are going to cover and are interested in, it's great to package together our storytelling in one place. But for anything that's more of a media pitch, or maybe doesn't have as obvious of a hook to it, I would agree that I think relationships are king. That's where I would start and finish. And for example, media hosting is still really strong driver of our media coverage. Any sort of media FaceTime, whether it's media receptions, we host things like media happy hours at some of our events, just the opportunity to get to know journalists and in return, PR professionals on a personal level and build a connection. So I would start there. And then I would also add kind of 2 other areas that I feel like are impactful. One is creating media moments, and the other is hooking media stories through compelling social media content. So a good example of media moments is ski resorts. We traditionally open new lifts or open new terrain. And that is a really great story. But if you can invite journalists to experience it at a deeper level, that also gives them the opportunity to sell this story and perhaps a trip up to a resort to their editors who are always watching the bottom line. Last year at Beaver Creek, we opened McCoy Park, which is 250 new acres of intermediate and beginner terrain. And instead of kind of the traditional ribbon cutting, we really put together a program where we invited community partners and legacy contributors who could help fill out the story and not only make remarks to our guests, but be available for media interviews. We gave media opportunities for first tracks to experience the terrain with a guide before it was open to the general public. And then of course we did the fun elements for our guests as well, and music and giveaways and ribbon cuttings, and packaging this all together in one afternoon. That's hard to turn down for a journalist, and it gives them an experience that they can talk about instead of just a news release or something that was delivered to them on paper.
Lindsay, go ahead.
Sorry. And then I was just going to mention, like, the opportunity to tell stories through social media. We've realized that oftentimes, without even pitching journalists, something that we cover on social media gets picked up by the media. So it's a great tool for journalists who are looking for story ideas. And as communicators, we can cross promote in recognizing that journalists follow our social channels. So for instance, lift updates, construction progress, even putting together reels packages that we then email out the links to journalists to encourage them to expand on that coverage. It gives them something visual to kind of whet their appetite.
Cool. That's exactly what I was going to ask, is how the social media factored in. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later too. Thanks so much, Lindsay. We're going to now go to our editors and journalists. And first I want to go to Katie Brinton. And Katie, as an editor, you're sitting at the editor's desk now. You're probably getting hit with all sorts of different pitches. What role does the news release play in all of that?
Yeah, we get a lot of junk releases, or the sort of mass release that's not at all targeted, but targeted releases that are of interest to our audience are a really key part of our editorial process, right? They're news sources for our digital platform. If you look at recent stories published under our headline news on SAM Info, a number of them evolved directly from press releases. We also look at individual releases as well as like a cumulative body of releases for trends and things that might inform editorial for our print, topics for our huddles, which are industry gatherings that we do on Zoom to hash out things like, is the press release dead? Or, you know, the state of marketing. So I think that the news release still very much has a role to play at SAM, and we really like them because we get the facts directly from the resort and we're able to turn that news around quickly. Social media statements and releases distributed via resort websites kind of function in the same way. But I will say that, you know, with the releases tending to be dropped on social media now direct to the consumer, we have shifted our work week to, you know, troll through Facebook and Instagram and Twitter to keep an eye on what news is happening there about things like, you know, lift openings and stuff that used to come direct to the magazine, right, as the only source. So that's sort of interesting. And another side effect of the sharing of news direct to social is that we get to see the public response to things really quickly. And that public opinion can be a great tool for informing our print editorial, right? It provides a really interesting commentary to let us know how people are engaging with changes in the industry. You know, we had a story we published in the March issue about mountain planning and the sort of finer points of capacity management that evolved directly out of conversations we were seeing that winter online about crowding, right? And so that sort of dynamic conversation that happens on social media now is as valuable in some ways to us as the press releases. And then, you know, social media and press releases aren't the only sources we use. That personal connection that Chris and Lindsay mentioned as sort of very key to their business is also really valuable to us. And we spend a lot of time chatting with operators and supplier contacts because stories can develop from a throwaway comment, right? Did you hear that so-and-so is investing in an entirely EV shuttle fleet? That's interesting to us and our readers. So those are really vital. And then on top of that, you know, we attend trade shows and industry events. We host our own events and educational programming, and all of that informs our edit calendar and our assignments as well.
Katie, for those industry PR professionals who may be on the forum here today, do you have any tips to in crafting your news release to kind of get it to rise above all the others that are coming across your desk?
Yeah, I mean, it helps that if it's applicable to SAM's audience, right? We're a business to business publication. So things that have a strong consumer angle don't always land for us. But I think more than that, the key is that releases are most valuable to us when they're honest and they're not just sort of hype or they're not full of puffery, right? There are facts in them that we can use to craft maybe a quick news story for our digital, or if it's something that's going to inform a story for the print magazine, we would, you know, we're interested in the nitty gritty details, which I know not everyone is, but, you know, we want to know about efficiency gains or labor, or if there's a good story that sort of pins something, right? You've got a new chairlift and that is of interest to us, but we have our construction site feature, right? And within that feature, we cover the specs of the new chairlift, the construction process, the equipment that was there, but we're also interested in the story of, you know, what the impact of that new lift is going to be on your operating process, whether that's from a staffing perspective or a consumer perspective. So I think if there's some story with the news release, that really is valuable to us too.
Cool. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
I want to move on to Stuart Winchester now. And Stuart, you are head cook and bottle washer. You are pretty much everything. And you had to start this thing from scratch a couple of years ago. So how do you get your news, and what role do things like news release and social media play in you determining your editorial direction?
Yeah, sure. So I do want to point out my wife does edit the podcast and she's a TV editor. So I'm very lucky to have her, and without her, that would not exist. So I want to echo what everyone else said about relationships. And it actually took me a while to realize this. And it was funny. I wrote this real smart ass thing when Mount Snow instituted paid parking a couple of years ago. And a rep from Vail Resorts called me up and he was like, hey, I get what you're doing. And I agree with you, but you really need to get our side. And I was like, well, it never occurred to me that Vail Resorts would care what I had to say. And that was a real moment for me when I was like, oh, well, maybe I need to focus a little bit more on this. So I've really taken to developing these relationships with these marketing and comms folks who are very eager to get their stories out. And I always tell them the first thing I say is put me on your news release list, because I want to be on it. I want to know, I want to be part of the loop. And if I'm not on your list, skiing@substack.com, please add me right now. There's two things. I do think press releases are super, super useful, but two things that I really hope that they can evolve to meet. One is really embargoes, because if you just put the release out and you just throw it to the lions, that they're all trying to eat the meat at once, and you're not going to get quality because everyone's racing to get that story out. And what I want to write is, a 3,000 word kind of nuanced piece, really exploring that. And if I'm trying to race everyone else to get that out, I'm not going to be able to do the same thing as I could with that time. And that quality piece, I think you get. The other thing about embargoes is now that I've understood the importance of relationships, I have moles everywhere, and they're not just the marketing and comms people. So in March, when all the past releases were coming out, there was a lot of people gave me embargoes, but a couple didn't. And in both cases, I beat their press release with my story. And there was in one case, I heard there was an internal manhunt to figure out who leaked, which I'll never tell. So just give me the embargo. My lips are sealed. I'm going to write a better story if I have it. And if you don't, there's a pretty good chance that I'm going to mess up your news cycle and beat you to it. So the other thing is, I really want to put an end to these garbage quotes that are completely useless. And I know that you have, 10 people reviewing these things. So here's a really good quote that came from IndyPass recently, from Doug Fish. It said, when they added Echo Mountain and Granby Ranch to the IndyPass, he wrote, "It's an incredible opportunity to lead. Colorado is the epicenter of skiing in North America, and we are proud to now have 4 partner resorts there." That's whatever. The second part is great. He said, "There are so many great pass options for Coloradans, and we don't expect pass sales in the state to be huge. However, our pass holders from around the country will be stoked to have these great additions for the Rocky Mountain vacations." So he's just out front. He's saying, like, look, I know if you live in Colorado, you're buying an Epic or an Icon Pass, maybe both, and you're not going to buy an Indy Pass because we added Echo and Granby Ranch. But, we think it's cool, and it's a big moment for us, and we think people visiting will like it. It was very honest and very out front. And he sort of cut off that take of, oh, who cares? Here's a really bad quote that I'm erasing the details from. "It's an incredible opportunity to lead XXX and continue to build on the impressive foundation that has been established by former leader. Our ownership group and the thousands of employees who operate our business at a high level every day," said new president. "Over the last year, I've watched our exceptional team thrive, and I am incredibly excited to continue that momentum as we look in the future." That is complete garbage. I'm never going to use it. Don't even waste your time. Just give me something that means something, that tells us something, or else it's just, you might as well just put the release out without it.
I really appreciate that. And one of the pieces of guidance I always gave my staff was, I never, ever want to see a release that says, "We are excited." Anything like that means nothing. Let's get into action verbiage. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. So we're gonna bring in a special guest right now. And just to give you a little bit of background before I introduce them, when we came up with this forum, we had no idea whatsoever that a very similar story was being produced for SAM Magazine. And we're going to talk to the author of that story. And to do that honor, happy to throw it up to Canada to my good friend and fellow VP at NASJA, MP Marie-Pierre Bellal Kennedy. MP, take it away.
Yes. Hi, everybody. It's funny, on the screen, I'm up north. So that's we're a few of us here in Canada. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Steven Threndyle, who happens to be one of my colleagues. We write for a lot of the same magazines among Ski Canada for many, many years. So Steven has a history with NASJA. So he's a two-time NASJA Harold Hirsch Award winner who occasionally takes on clients looking for targeted media outreach, as most of us do. I used to work for resorts, and I still translate and write for resort associations. So when Stuart, you were talking about embargo, I have written, edited, and translated a press release that I was not allowed to share, and I received it as media. So I relate to what you're saying. Steven's freelance media outlets includes SAM Magazine, which we'll talk about in a short moment, Ski Canada Magazine, Globe and Mail in Canada, Duel Nouveau, and he has done some PR for Big White, Silver Star, Icebreaker, a movie, a film, and Rocky Mountain Bikes, West Coast Modern, and real estate. So Steven, my first question to you is welcome. And my
Thanks
first
for having
question,
us.
yes, sorry, it's not a
Thanks for having
question.
me. Great.
We're like doing the live talk show. So you have said, and I quote you now, that communication is a messy because there's a lot of touch points with your brand. So I'm quoting you. What led you to the article that happens to have the same title as we had tonight? I remember you called me, or you asked me once how many press releases an average journalist can get in a week, and I said many, but I don't read them all. So can you take it away now and tell us more about what led to that idea and to pitch SAM Magazine about it?
Well, when you kind of think about it, sort of the whole idea of is the press release dead? It's kind of clickbait in a sense, because you're putting an idea out there that, as I think, it's kind of attention grabbing and that sort of thing. And of course, I knew when I, sort of pitched the idea, actually, it was, I met Katie after one of the, virtually, obviously, after one of the NASJA meetings that we had back last spring. And I love SAM. I think they do a great job. And I, sort of am a snow sports journalist who really, tries to look at, sort of under the hood of the industry and that sort of thing. So I kind of put on my thinking cap and thought, this would be a good topic for, for SAM to explore. And yeah, obviously, coincidentally, NASJA was thinking the same thing. So, once I threw it out there, lots of people, obviously, from the story, I had a lot of comments, and it is obviously it's still a very useful part of it's sort of what I think is it's a centering strategy or part of a brand's strategy. Thinking of a series of press releases throughout a season, whether it's tied to events, whether it's tied to promotions, that sort of thing. It can sort of serve as a cornerstone for resorts as they sort of progress out through the winter. And I learned a lot actually from the people that I'd interviewed.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to touch base. We have some of our members that you've interviewed, some resorts on both sides of the border.
Sure.
And some resort association. Are you as approached as I am with also PR? We were hearing before about relationships. I know that I've become friends with PR people, but before the press release, I'd like to get a scoop or an angle, and they know, so do you still sell a story or pitch? Because you'll get the same press release I will, and we might
Sure.
pitch the same editor. So what's the value for to get a media story? I mean, is it too late? Yeah,
it's interesting because essentially, and I think it's true, with NASJA or whatever niche of an industry you work in, you've got people that basically have, sort of the paid gigs. They're writing for one of the wire services. They're writing for the New York Times, Globe and Mail, that sort of thing, even your local newspaper. And that's just a totally different kind of journalist than, the person who is writing for the specialty magazines, who is, far more of an enthusiast. And, but I really, I have an enormous respect for sort of what the, kind of the journalistic rigor of, the fact checking process. Is this really a story, et cetera, et cetera. And when I do work on the PR side, this is why I just work in a very highly targeted fashion. I see a story for somebody that I think is perfect. What's happened, especially like with COVID, is a lot of freelance budgets have dried up. So, you know, you really have to, I guess we're trying to make a living however we can in this crazy new world. But I think if you're a communicator, you've got to really be kind of striding both sides of the street a little bit, which, you know, is a kind of an uncomfortable position to be in too from time to time.
Right, but if we talk about the article that will be released, or it's out now, right, in SAM Magazine?
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to plug our discount, because all NASJA member, and I know, Steven, you've subscribed recently,
Yeah.
we get 50% of the SAM membership. So in your article, you've interviewed resorts, and you've also shared your own experience where you had to announce a snow park for the weekend. And they wanted a press release on their desk in 20 minutes, but you
absolutely.
You went beyond that. You called the news people you knew, or how did you get it done?
Well, it's interesting because it was a real introduction. I was working on contract for a resort that you know is very big in the local community, and but they also, you know, they have international reach. I basically kind of thought my job was to, you know, sort of you know, attract as much national and international attention. But, you know, when it comes down to the dollars and cents, a lot of the you know, the clientele is local, and it's just very interesting to sort of put a press release out there and then see it on local television. And these are local markets, I have to say. This is, you know, we're talking a city of about 150,000. These are not, you know, in major metro markets, you would just cringe at the thought that you were going to basically, you know, call a journalist up about a, you know, terrain park opening. But, you know, slow news day and at a lot of smaller towns and cities. And what I found through the SAM story was that obviously a lot of PR people, you know, exploit those relationships or have very close relationships with the local media. And I think that's great.
And as a writer and editor, any final thoughts on how you would edit the perfect press release? Because we get so many. It's some are too sales.
No, final thought basically is that, make the reader care. A good press pitch, I think, you know, is a subject line, a head, a subhead, and the first paragraph shouldn't really be longer than 150 to 200 words. Get the hell out, get the contact information out there for further information, et cetera, on to the next thing, you know, and personalize it, you know, if you can, and that should give you more time to actually personalize it. But, you know, I recognize obviously a lot of resorts and a lot of companies use Cision, you know, they Market Wire, all of these other, you know, and that's another thing entirely. And actually, one thing that I did not address in the story that I think is quite important is that you know, there is a search functionality to press releases that are sent out on Market Wire, Cision, that sort of thing. That you know, basically news gets picked up a lot quicker if it's, you know, properly, if the releases are properly optimized. I don't know really anything about that world sort of thing, but I could see it being very valuable to resorts in terms of extending their reach.
Yeah, so we'll invite everybody to read the article. And last thing I wanted to say is congrats to all the PR people who really follow up, because for me as a magazine writer, we only have 4 or 5 issues a year. And there's one PR company that pitched me 4 times and I'm finally got to get a story out. So sometimes it's a year later with us, eh? Yeah. We're not live on social. So back to you in the studio, Tom.
Great. Thank you very much. Steven, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for the interview, MP. Great to have representation from our good friends up in Canada. So we're going to move back to our panelists right now, and I want to explore a little bit about some of the evolution that we've seen over the past decade or so. And I know that each of you will have a little bit of a different take on this, but how has your role evolved and what changes have you seen in your business over the last decade or so? And Katie Brinton, we're going to go to you first.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. So, I mean, it's interesting. We published a 60-year timeline of 60 defining moments in the mountain resort industry this September in celebration of our 60th birthday. But one of the things that's fun about that timeline is that when you look back, it's amazing how young the industry was in 1962 and how new so much of what we accept as sort of standard now, right? Quad chairs, tracked cats, trail markers, ski area insurance. That was brand new in the 60s and 70s. And so, you know, when SAM first hit the market in 1962, it had a strong sort of op-ed voice. Its job was sort of to hold a mirror up to a rapidly changing industry and ask it to be critical of its best practices. And I think these days we still play a role in critiquing the industry and creating space for those important op-eds. We also try to sort of spread leading practices by profiling programs and strategies and tactics that are successful at resorts around the globe. And, you know, I think one of the things that we're really proud of is our sort of reputation as a trusted news source, right? I mean, Steven was talking about how that news cycle it breaks really quickly, especially with so much news breaking on social media. And a lot of times the news that breaks is really just like a 180 character headline. And then people, right, consumers, but also industry insiders are just reacting to a headline statement without all of the facts. And so I think while we're not always the first to report on something, we're a really small team at SAM working across multiple platforms and 2 publications. So we juggle a lot. You know, we do aim to try to be really accurate in our reporting and take the time to reach out to our industry sources and confirm details and get quotes. And I think one of the things that the rapidity of the news cycle really demonstrates is the value in slowing down, right? So we're really experiencing that at SAM. And I think, you know, another sort of side effect of that is that our magazine publishes bi-monthly, right? So once every 2 months. And that means that when we're thinking about topics for print versus our other platforms, right? Versus something that we're going to put right onto the digital platform, we're thinking about longevity and an angle that is going to feel fresh and relevant, even as we're watching news unfold, you know, this week, if that makes sense. So I think that we, a good example would maybe be the Gunstock drama that unfolded this summer. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Gunstock has some public oversight, and the staff and the Gunstock Area Commission were arguing for some very good reasons, and the staff quit. And we covered the quit, the resort shutdown, the resignations, the board conflicts, and the eventual resolution of those conflicts in real time on our digital platform throughout July and August. And then, you know, we didn't want to just recap that for the magazine, but there was a really interesting story there. So in the September issue of our magazine, 2 months later, we had a story that took a broader, more investigative look at the pitfalls of public oversight and perhaps interference in ski area operations. And so I think that one of the ways that our company has evolved, right, is that SAM is no longer just a print magazine, it's a multimedia company, and we recognize that content gets offered, it needs to be offered in multiple ways, right? Sometimes it's headline news, sometimes it's in print, sometimes it's on PodSam, or it's part of an industry huddle, or it's an education topic for one of our in-person events. And, you know, sometimes we cross-share information and stories on those different platforms, and other times you have to pick and choose, right? Not all content is suited to all platforms. And so I think that that's one of the really interesting evolutions that we've gone through.
You know, it's fascinating to listen to that, because I think back to the days when it was just a print magazine and that was your own only focus. Now you have to be so much more diverse. Thanks for sharing that, Katie. I want to go now to Stuart Winchester. And Stuart, you haven't been around with the Storm Skiing Journal for a decade, but I think as a new age media company coming in, you have a pretty good sense of this. And what is it that you represent that you think is really maybe a different or a cutting edge way to present news to consumers now?
Well, I think that my story is kind of one of the death of the gatekeeper, because I really had never worked in the ski industry. I just sort of started this and I did it on Substack. And, there was the comment earlier was Chris or Lindsay was pointing out the ratio of journalists to PR pros is something like 5-1 of PR pros. And Substack really does create a way for journalists to find a niche, create it, and make a living, because I was able to turn on paid subscriptions with 3 button clicks and to do it immediately. Now, I didn't. I did the Storm for free for 2.5 years before I did that in February and turned on the paywall. But what I found, and I was very nervous to do it, is that there is a large contingent of people who will pay for content that they can't get elsewhere. And I really had to make sure that it was consistent, that it was relevant, that I was providing things that you couldn't necessarily get elsewhere, and that it was good, it was quality. Skiing's fun, and reading about it should be as well. So I think the story of the Storm is really the story of how a journalist who really is driven to cover a certain subject, and they see an opening, can do that and can make it. This is now a sustainable small business. It's not just a hobby, which is I think kind of what it started as. And someone can do that. And, the industry has been great about acknowledging what I'm doing and working with me, and not dismissing it as just a blog or, some hobbyist or something. So it has turned into a legitimate media platform. And I think anyone can do that now, and Substack enables that. And this is certainly not something I ever could have come up with on my own. Their whole pitch is writers write, we work on the tech and do the whole back end. And I have zero interest in running a website. All I want to do is write. It's literally the only thing that I care about besides skiing. There's a lot of platforms out there that enable that.
One thing I just want to, if you could give me a 30-second description for those who might not know of what Substack is and why it's perfectly suited for independent journalists such as yourself.
Yeah, it's a newsletter platform, and you can just go on and start a Substack, and it's super easy to subscribe. And every time you send out an email, it goes to your whole list. You can also host podcasts on there. And then when I publish a podcast, it syncs up to iTunes and Spotify and Google. And I don't even know where, I find it in places that I don't even know what they are. And then you build up your list, and then you can turn on a paywall, and people who want to subscribe and pay can. And I can insert a paywall on an article, which I do on almost every article. And in order to read past a certain point, you have to pay. And then paid subscribers get podcasts 3 days early. And it's gone really well. And it was super easy to do. I never would have been able to do it myself. Never, ever, ever. So.
Well, it is really a fascinating platform. We're going to go over to the PR side now. I'm going to start out with Chris Goddard. Chris, how have things changed for you over the last decade, and how you make a pitch to media?
Quicker, faster. It is unforgiving. But Tom, going back to something that you said earlier about quotes, to start with, I'm excited. I think it's equally bad, I'm thrilled. How many quotes do we say, I'm thrilled? Can we please stop saying I'm thrilled? We know you're not thrilled. But it's almost like you're standing in front of a tennis ball machine, just because as an agency, we have so many clients asking us. It's basically, when do you want it? We don't know when we want it. When do you want it? We want it now. So quicker, faster. Also, instead of just products, media are now looking for deeper and more thoughtful stories. Sorry if there's an echo, such as sustainability is really, really big across the board, no matter what you're talking about. The other thing I would say is that when we pitch media, our subject lines have to be written like a news headline, because you have to find a way to stand out. And if you send something, we always never send attachments either, ever. But your subject line, you basically have 3 seconds to catch the attention of a journalist, no more. And so your subject line has to be your pitch, and you have to write it like a news journalist. And I would also say, just in the end, that PR is it's really, really hard. It's unforgiving. It's not for the faint of heart. So you have to be 150% in love with what you're doing, because it's extraordinarily difficult right now. And because things are changing so fast, you can't get frustrated. You can't get upset. You just have to sort of work through it. So I'll stop there.
Well, that's really a good recap. I'm going to go back to that excited and thrilled things. Again, I would tell my staff, if you're writing a news release, I hope you're excited about it. So that's not news. We need to go on to something better. Okay, we're going to go to Lindsay Hogan now. Lindsay, from your perspective at Vail Resorts and also having worked in the Olympic movement in America, what are some of the things that you've seen evolve over the last decade?
Yeah, well, I think Chris captured the media relations side of PR really well, and just the evolution that we've seen there. So perhaps I can touch on where I think as PR professionals, the importance and the opportunity that we now have to balance out media relations, which is still as important as ever, with the opportunity to tell our own story through owned and social media channels. And it is detrimental to any brand if they're not taking advantage of that opportunity to speak directly to their guests, directly to their consumers, whether it's informational and news updates or whether it's inspiring content in general. So we certainly, anytime we have some sort of news release or news item, we're also going to feature it on social media in one form or another. We've also had a lot of success across our resorts creating social media content series that our followers learn to expect and enjoy and look for what's next. A couple examples at North Star, we created Mountain Bike Tip Tuesday with some of our staff members there, something regular for our guests to look back at. At Vail, we have a social media series called Staff Picks, where we invite employees to share 3 of their favorite spots in town, or kind of behind the scenes insider's tip for a great trip. And it allows us to showcase what to experience through the voice of real people who know the resorts so well. And then own channels too. We have blogs at a number of our resorts that allow us to get a little more long form content. And this can be really important, not only for the fun stuff, but for redirecting potential crisis areas. So one of our leaders is Tom Fortune. When we had some issues last season at Stevens Pass, Tom Fortune stepped in with a regular blog to provide very transparent, candid, regular updates with our guests and our local, passionate locals who had a lot of thoughts and opinions. And part of this blog was listening to what our followers wanted to hear more about, or what their questions were, what their concerns were. And so we've now continued that. Tom Fortune has moved on. We have a new COO at Stevens Pass who's doing fantastic, but Tom has kind of found his niche. So he now has Fortune Friday, which is a regular blog. He's the SVP for our 3 Tahoe resorts, Heavenly, North Star, and Kirkwood. And he covers any number of topics and is just very accessible to our guests and ensures that we have this direct line of communication, again, for everything from the fun to the more serious, but ensuring that we're using our voice and our platforms. And then the only other thing I would add to that is increasingly a huge impactful tool is working with influencers. It's another opportunity to work with third parties who are trusted among their follower group, as well as expanding your reach, perhaps outside of the traditional ski audience. So we've had some good luck with this as well. There are plenty of influencers looking to partner with brands. The key is really finding those who are authentic and have relatable connections and feel like a fit both to their audience and your audience. One of my favorite influencers who I've had the opportunity to work with recently is a guy out of Fort Collins, Colorado named Dude Dad. If you haven't followed him, he's a former actor. He's very comedic. It's just been really great for our brands to have like a lighthearted social media partnership. There are so many travel influencers, but this is a very different audience, looking to have a little bit more fun, look on the comedic side of the industry. And I also think what's been key in our relationship with him and all influencers is to put the control in their hands. Like, what are their ideas? What's authentic to them to talk about, rather than prescribing some sort of messaging or content concept. We really trust our influencers and enjoy working with them in terms of what they bring to the plate and what their voice is and who their audience is.
If you don't know Dude Dad, go check him out. He's hilarious. So, Lindsay, I'm going to come back to you in just a second. Panelists, we're going to go to the final question, which is going to be look into the crystal ball and what's going to change over the next 5 years or so. I'm going to give you a second, Lindsay, to collect your thoughts and ask all of our panelists, let's do a 30 seconds crystal ball look. Just for all of you on the call, we're happy to do Q&A. If you want to slide a question into the chat, we'll post that to our panelists. We want to close things out here in about 5 minutes. So crystal ball, Lindsay, Hogan, take a look. 5 years out, what are we going to see?
Tom, if you have a story you could direct me to for that crystal ball, I'll take it. I would love it. But I think just my quick snapshot view would be the importance of engaging with consumers, two-way storytelling instead of just talking at people. I think that's going to continue to be an expectation on all communications channels. I also think the power and the importance of values-based storytelling. People really want to connect with news outlets and brands that they relate to and brands that they believe in. I also think, digital, we all know, has taken over. And so digital growth is going to continue. We're going to see, sadly, less and less print. But that also means opportunity to unlock new ways of communicating with folks, going back to that two-way engagement being so crucial, and using social and own channels as a tool as well.
Great. Lots of stuff to unpack there. Chris Goddard, 30 seconds, crystal ball, tell us.
I think moving forward, PR is going to be a lot more about than just media relations. You have to have a good mix that includes podcasts, thought leadership, influencers. You can't just rely on media relations anymore. And the other thing is, I would agree that values, consumers are looking for companies that align with their values. So it's got to be way more than just a product or the opening of a new lift or whatever it is. It has to be aligned with more ESG values. And those would be my two.
Great. Stuart, Winchester, what lies beyond the podcast?
I think we overcorrected to snippets and short form and little videos and Stoke. And I think people are seeing the value in long form. I really hope to get some competitors who are, trying to do the same sort of analysis that I'm doing. I think that this format works though for me. Substack, I think it scales well. I'm going to add Canada in May. I already have a bunch of pods booked with Whistler and Sun Peaks and some others, and so I'm excited to just keep growing this thing. And I think that I'm going to have company, and I hope I do.
Good. Well, we look forward to seeing what comes up next. And Katie Brinton, you get the last word. Crystal ball. What do you got?
Oof. Okay. So I think that print's not dead yet, right? It's still a core part of SAM, and we still have a sustainable subscriber model. Lindsay talked about the opportunity that exists for resorts to sort of share their own story on their own social channels. And we've certainly seen that trend growing and a lot of resorts leveraging that to really great effect, which is exciting. I will say when you share a story direct to social media, you only reach your resort's followers. So news that's distributed through us and through other news media outlets reaches a different audience, and that's still important. And I think we have to recognize that social media is going through a shift right now. User demographics for different social channels are changing. New platforms like TikTok are seeing really huge growth, and that like a lot of us have not figured out yet how to leverage those. And Twitter is seemingly imploding right before our eyes, right? So with all of those changes underway, and frankly, the sort of vitriolic nature of social media comments, I think, like Stuart said, there's still a really valuable place for long form reporting, right? There's the short form, quick, snappy headline without facts and instant react that has become really common on social media. I think it has the possibility or the potential to sort of erode public trust. And I think that the communication landscape's a little unsettled right now, but so there could be a pendulum swing back towards some of those more traditional communication strategies, right? Like I said, the press release, an honest press release with a good quote, not a shitty one, has a lot of value to us. And those person-to-person conversations and those interpersonal connections with people at resorts are just absolutely key.
Great. Katie, thank you very much for that. And, you know, it's really fun to hear so many people talk about long form content. As a long form writer, I'd love to see that come back. So, Katie, thank you very much. Thanks to all of our panelists. We're at the end of our time. So I'm going to go back to Jeff Blumenfeld, the president of NASJA, for some closing comments, and then I'll wrap it up and close things out. Jeff, take it away.
Oh, man, there's a lot to unpack here. But clearly, the duty of the media is to inform and not to sell. And we're all working to explain to the Snowsports to the Snowsports consumer where to go and what to wear and how to enjoy the winter world in a safe manner. I invite you all to take a run with us. Follow NASJA on Facebook and Twitter, and view the NASJA YouTube channel. Journalist or communicator or corporate representative, help us in our mission as we end our 60th year. You can see nasja.org for membership information. So sign up if you're so moved to do so. And happy holidays to everybody. Take care.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I'm going to bring our panelists back up on the screen so we can do a final farewell. Thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight for this NASJA Professional Development Forum. We have enjoyed bringing you hopefully some good insights tonight. And I think I have everybody up there. Let me find Steven. Well, he'll be there in spirit. Anyways, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight, and happy holidays. We'll see you out on the hill.